I'd like to call this meeting of the Bellingham City Council's Public Works, Public Safety Committee to order. Joining me today is Michael Lilliquist and Jack Weiss, filling in for Roxanne Murphy. We have two items before us today. The first is a proposed ordinance accepting donations of Stonecrest Stormwater Facility.
Thank you. Good morning, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. This is actually the second part of this particular agenda item. A few weeks back, we came to council to ask council's authority to go do due diligence on this particular piece of property. You may recall over the last year or so, this will be the third stormwater facility that staff has come to council requesting that the city take the stormwater facilities into public ownership, where we would own the facility, maintain the facility. That's consistent with the way we do business. That's consistent with our stormwater code, that when a subdivision goes in, the stormwater facility to treat the stormwater runoff from the subdivision, once everything's complete, comes over to the city for maintenance. We believe that's the best way to ensure proper maintenance and good stormwater water quality. There's a few of them hanging out there. I think this may be one of the last ones that the subdivision was built in the county. The rules were different in the county's rules. Those stormwater facilities were maintained by the homeowners association. Now that this facility is within the city, we would like to bring it into our inventory. So we went out and did the phase 1 environmental work on council's request, and the property came back without any environmental or title issues. So we're now back to request formal action by the council to take the facility into the city's ownership. Just for your reference, this is up on Bakerview. There's a map in your packet that shows it's in the Iron Gate area. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Okay. Michael?
Ted, we've had, as you said, a couple of these come forward before, and I really didn't like some of the earlier ones because they were in really bad shape.
Right.
And we had to spend a lot of money to bring them up to condition. This one doesn't have that problem at all. But I did notice that there was an estimated $3,000 to $4,000 just sort of annual upkeep costs. Facilities cost money, I understand that, and homeowners in the area will be paying into the stormwater fund. That's their share. But I'm wondering how many houses in the development in the area are sort of being served by this? Is it roughly even? Is there about that much revenue coming in to cover about that much area? I don't mean exactly. We don't need to count pennies, but I'm wondering if it's proportionate at least.
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't been through that particular analysis, but I would assume that it's more, we're recovering at least the cost to operate the stormwater facility, because when we look at how we build our stormwater rates, the rate typically covers maintenance and operation of all of our facilities, as well as paying for a portion of stormwater runoff from public right-of-way, stream crossings, culverts, things that aren't necessarily associated directly with an individual's property, the stormwater runoff from their property. So we could go through the analysis and see whether or not that's the case on this particular one, but generally people pay for the maintenance. And this cost is an estimate. We just basically look at all of our facilities and the amount of money that we put into maintenance of our water quality facilities. Some cost more to maintain, others cost less, obviously. Generally what the crews do is they go out, there's some annual vegetation maintenance. At some point, facilities need to be maintained where the sediment in the pond needs to be removed so that the pond functions correctly. The control structures need to be cleaned out, but that's not the same with every facility. Some require more maintenance than others. So I don't know, Eric, if you have more to add to that, but.
No, I think Ted's got it about right. It's really hard to say what's the cost of each individual pond to each individual homeowner served directly by that pond, because there are some areas, some neighborhoods that don't have stormwater facilities yet, and so it tends to balance out citywide. So we try not to be specific to your impact as to your specific piece of property. It's just a general utility fee that serves citywide.
Well, but I think there's a problem with taking that too far. It's important to know when some areas are disproportionately expensive for infrastructure and some areas are cheaper. That's sort of the principle behind a lot of our development. We're trying to guide development to less expensive, easier to serve areas. So, yeah, it's not fair to require a complete one-to-one reimbursement. As you say, you buy into the whole system, and for streets they drive on that aren't near their home.
Right.
But it is important, I think, to understand which areas are disproportionately expensive or disproportionately easy to serve as a more general principle, not to nick this particular development, but to just consider development in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point because we go from, there's kind of two issues at play here. Certainly wanting development to pay for their proportionate fair share cost of things, but then as we transition into the utility realm, and when we look at how we set rates, I mean, the fundamental principle of rate setting is uniformity across customer class. And we get into this quite a bit, and you can take any of the utilities. If you take water as an example, we certainly have folks that, for instance, reside in a gravity zone, and they're fed strictly by gravity from the water treatment plant. And you could certainly argue that it's cheaper to serve them than a residential customer that lives on top of a hill that requires pumping system and reservoirs and things of that nature. But we don't get into that because state law, and Matt's sitting here as well, is very clear that across customer classes, and when we look at the utilities, we're talking about residential, single-family residential, multifamily, commercial, industrial. In those individual classes, everybody must be charged uniformly. And it's the same with stormwater. Stormwater is a utility, so when we look at residential rates, every residential person within a customer class needs to be charged the same. Now, there's differentiating, large lot, small lot, and we do that through our code. But you're right, when we look at development and we look at new development, we want to make sure that the development is built in a way that we can serve them in the most efficient manner and make sure that the revenue received by the residential development or commercial development offsets the cost. It can be a challenging analysis, and so what we do is try to really average those costs out in bounds with our code and state law.
Well, what I guess I'm saying is not that we consider ways of charging one set of customers differently than the other, but more as a global issue so that everyone doesn't pay a little extra subsidy, is that we don't build in expensive areas. I don't think this area is expensive. Right. It's pretty flat. It's pretty accessible. That isn't an issue here. I'm just raising the more general issue, looking at operating costs. So thanks for answering the question.
Jack?
I would move approval, and then I had another question.
Go for the question.
What's that?
I said go for the question.
Okay. What you're saying, calling for the question.
No.
Associated with these stormwater facilities, is when we're doing our regional facility up north, but when developers are doing their own individual ones, are we bumping up the best available science on that? Like similar to what Western has done with their larger facility that they've done in Happy Valley?
Yeah, so we absolutely are with the new Department of Ecology regulations, the stormwater requirements. Those are being applied, so infiltration on site is the best. So if a development can take care of their stormwater on their property through infiltration and low impact development type stormwater techniques, then that's what they do. If the soils or the topography or some other characteristic of the land use doesn't allow for that, then you kind of go through the progressions. But the updated manual, our updated stormwater permit through ecology, and as we're going to go through updating our stormwater requirements as well, it's a process we're working on right now, is leaning towards those on-site low-impact development. It's already something that we require people to go through. It's certainly allowable and encouraged, and we're seeing that happen, especially on smaller individual lots. You get to the bigger lots, and there's a lot of street that they have to treat. So a subdivision where they're building public roads, there's just a lot for them to try to deal with infiltration, and they may have to build a stormwater facility. But even those, the design of the stormwater facilities are changing. If you look at the regional facility we're building up off of Bakerview, it's much different than what you would have seen in the past, where you have it's more of a engineered wetland. It's shallower, more plantings to try to really mimic that natural wetland versus a big sedimentation pond that's using just slowing down the velocity of the water and settling it out. So it is becoming better, and it is a requirement.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we have a motion before us. All those in favor, answer aye.
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 Okay, we'll recommend approval tonight.
Thank you.
The next item is a update on Public Works Operations Division.
Great, thank you. This is kind of continuing with trying to bring issues forward to council. There's no council action here, it's information only, but just take an opportunity at the end of the year to highlight some of the activities and accomplishments in the operations division. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Eric, and he's going to run through a quick presentation here.
Thank you, Ted. It's Eric Johnston, Public Works. So the screens in here, we only have the one screen behind you. Apologize for that today. But we are here to talk about Public Works operations, but Public Works in general as well to some extent. So recall that the Public Works Department is comprised of three basic groups: the Engineering and Capital Group, which takes care of capital projects; the Natural Resources Group, which is our natural resources folks with habitat restoration and stormwater management; environmental policy related to Lake Whatcom and some other issues. And then the Operations Group are the folks who are on the street every day making sure that our infrastructure is functioning properly and correctly. I've got a couple of those folks here in the audience today: Terry Falstrom, Marty Gray, and Mike Ollinger from the Water Group are here in the audience today a little bit as well. In total, in the Public Works Department, there's about 230 regular employees, and at any given point in time, we've got a couple of temporary or part-time seasonal positions filling in there as well. It is the largest group within the city of Bellingham. Last year we talked about safety. We're talking about safety again this year. So 2014 we had 13 recordable incidents and 0 lost time incidents. This year we are fewer number of incidents, but we do have 2 minor lost time incidents. They were not significant. I think on a day or two, and those 2 folks were back to work pretty quickly. So we are seeing continuing steady focus on safety, making sure our people are safe at home, safe at work, so they can go home and take care of their families, which is a good thing to do. We take great pride in our customer service. We do take a very high volume of calls within the Public Works Department, both for customer service calls and for just general requests for service or questions or concerns from citizens. Any given month, we're about 1,500 phone calls and between 50 to 60 emails a month. So it does vary as the seasons go on. As you get an issue that might be potentially problematic or controversial, those volumes go up a little bit, but generally throughout the year, they're pretty consistent and constant. They tend to go up as the weather gets bad. And we do try to respond to those as quickly as we can. In the future, as we look forward to a change in systems or software systems that run the department, looking at opportunities to make those customer service requests more easily accessible to the public. These days, with many Public Works departments, they have internet-based or smartphone-based system that you can put your customer service request in that somewhat automates the response, but it also allows us to track and manage and report back to the citizen when that issue has been resolved. One of the challenges we have is many times somebody will call, or several people will call about a particular issue, one that we've already resolved or that has been taken care of, and people just don't know about that yet. So it's systems to help people understand that we are paying attention, we are responding and taking care of those things. But that'll be probably a ways out before that gets put into place. One of our big focuses, and probably one of our highest priority focuses, particularly in the utilities side, was the metering project. That's been going on for a couple of years. We've still got about a year and a half through 2017 to get it finished. And Marty and Terry here today were the supervisors helping the crews get that work done. They did outstanding work this year. The crews really worked hard, put 2,600 meters in. The goal was to be in by the 1st of October so that our utility billing staff could be ready and find customers who had higher than normal consumption and try to help those folks get down before billing started. So by having those meters in by the 1st of October, that gave us November and December to track down customers whose consumption was excessive and probably was resulting from a leak. One thing we want to note for folks is that if your meter was installed in 2015, the billing for that begins in 2016, so January 1 of next month.
Eric?
Yes.
How many of those potentially leaking high consumption households did we find? 2 or 3 or a dozen? Or
You know, I don't know that number specifically. It's not very many, and we're shrinking that number down. When we first started, we were looking at consumption that was more than 100 cubic feet per month. We're now reducing that down to about 70. So as we get further and further along into where we're finding where those numbers are, most often it's related to a leaky toilet or somebody's got a break in their irrigation system they didn't know about, but it's not very much. And sometimes when we get a high consumption, it's just somebody uses an awful lot of water.
What are the outstanding neighborhoods?
Mike? What's next?
Outstanding there with Birchwood is what we're starting on right now, and then we move to Southville.
So we're in Birchwood, Happy Valley, and South Hill neighborhood for next year. Our stormwater crews do a pretty good job as well. This is a group that's seeing an increased need for manpower, if you will, as we put more and more stormwater facilities in, more and more regulation related to stormwater, which is a good thing, helps us protect the environment. That does require more work. This is a picture of a before and after shot of the 22nd Street detention pond. The council took action on this earlier this summer. This was a pond that had really had zero maintenance onto it at all. Our crews were able to get in there and really clean that facility up, put it back to basic functioning. What was before was an overgrown, I'm not sure what to call it, but it was quite overgrown, and now it's more open. It's functioning as it was intended to do. The litter and the garbage and the trash and the rodent problem has gone away from this by our crews getting in there, taking care of it, and cleaning it up. Down at our wastewater treatment plant, our folks are continuing to keep that infrastructure up and running. We did a major improvement there the last couple of years, but there's still infrastructure there that needs to be maintained on a regular basis. So the picture on the left are the secondary clarifier scraper arms, mechanical equipment to make sure that the treatment plant functions and run. That was replaced by our crews. That keeps that facility operational and functioning for the next 20 years. It's part of our attention to our asset management principles by fixing what we have and keeping it in service for a long period of time. New for us in 2015 was the addition of citywide video system surveillance. We had cameras that we have had for a long time, cameras that have been on our traffic signals for an operational perspective. This year we expanded that use a little bit. We replaced several of the cameras in the downtown area and added new cameras to Blodell Donovan Park, Maritime Heritage Park, Civic Field, the library, and the Bellingham Police Department. And these are some still captures of those cameras. This is going to help us monitor and keep an eye on what's happening in these facilities. This system is enabled over the internet, so our patrol officers and our dispatchers have access to these cameras as well. Sergeants in the field have access through the internet to be able to see what's happening at the location when a call comes in, or just monitor it from a remote location. We do record this video. So this video is recorded. We are required to keep that under public records, and it is accessible to the public if that does come up and somebody requests that.
Eric, do we have a retention interval on those?
30 days.
30 days?
30 days. So in order to put this system in, that required new cameras, new power, new infrastructure, as well as the hardware, software systems to be able to retain and protect that information.
Also with that, is it, at our intersections that we are monitoring for traffic flow, is that part of this system as well?
It is. It is.
Okay.
That created the initial backbone of the system. So the fiber connecting each of those traffic cameras for operational purposes created the fiber system network available to enable the installation of the cameras for security purposes at some of the parks and some of the city facilities. It created the backbone for that. As part of that same installation, we added additional cameras at the Commercial Street parking garage to help improve security down there. This is a still shot of an incident that was monitored by the cameras, and the box in red is a computer-driven algorithm that monitors the cameras automatically, and it picks up behavior using the algorithm that is not typical or would not be considered worth looking at further. So when the computer picks up a behavior that shouldn't be happening, like somebody standing in one place for a long period of time, it alerts an operator. The operator looks at that video, live video, and if there's a determination that behavior needs to move on, then they will turn on the microphones and the speakers and instruct the people doing what they're doing to leave. And we have a very high compliance rate with that. So if we find somebody who's loitering or doing something inappropriate in the parkade, the giant voice comes on and says, "You need to leave, you're trespassing, please leave this facility," and they typically do. They also tell them that the police have been called, and when the police come, they're able to respond to that pretty quickly. So we're pretty excited about this. This is going to help increase our security at the parking garage and help people feel more comfortable using that facility. It costs us about $45,000 a year to operate that. It was costing us about $45,000 a month for the full-time security, so it's a pretty effective approach to that.
Do you use a voice that sounds like Dale?
Yes. It's a voice from above. Our operations crew also moved forward and took action on the Fairhaven Parking Task Force Plan. This was the implementation of the 2-hour parking in Fairhaven. And I mentioned this for a couple of reasons. One is that we actually followed through and did it, which is a good thing. No surprise there. We usually follow through. But the feedback that we've gotten from the merchants in particular says that this is working fairly well. I was at the Merchants Association meeting in September and asked specifically about how did they feel that the 2-hour parking was, and there were some pros and cons, but overall the feeling was that it was meeting the intended purpose, which is to make parking available for customers. And so some of the longer term issues where employees of other businesses were parking in somebody's business, those issues have been solved.
I think it'd be really great to maybe follow up again with the Fairhaven merchants, say after the Christmas season and springtime, see how it's working. My impression is it hasn't had much of an effect, and I mean that in a positive way. It hasn't created a problem or a bottleneck, but it'd be nice to check in 6 months rather than just after the first few months.
Yep. That's part of the plan. The plan says us doing touch points on the implementation strategies every year. So we do plan on going back and doing more counts in May and June of the next summer for sure. But we are keeping a close eye on this one. Also, as part of that, we've placed an order for a number of new bicycle racks for both Fairhaven and downtown. Also part of the parking, and our staff will be installing those as soon as they are delivered from the supplier in Blaine.
Jack, you had a question?
Is there an understanding of where the employees are now parking?
You know, I don't know that. I don't know where they have moved off to. I'm sure that it has been places outside of the 2-hour parking zone, but that has also been considered as part of the plan as to where try to manage that demand.
If there's any leak over into the neighborhood itself?
Correct.
Move from one spot to the other.
Yeah. Every 2 hours.
The federal building renovation, this was a primary effort of the city last 2 years actually. As part of the operations group, the facilities division took the lead on designing and issuing the contract for construction. We were very pleased to move the engineering staff into that space the 1st of November. The utilities network upgrade, this is, I mentioned this for a couple of reasons. One is, there is, from time to time, conversations about smart cities, about wired cities and connected cities. And we don't necessarily have a directed effort to create a smart city, but this is, in effect, creating a smart city. The utilities network is connected through a SCADA system, a series of network controls that ties almost all of our utility pumping stations with water and sewer back into a single point.
Could you say what SCADA means?
You know, I can never remember.
Sorry.
Supervisory
Control, automated data, automation, something or other like that. I can't remember what that is. But it's a computer automated system that pulls data off of the individual controls and pump stations and buildings, brings it back to a central control point.
Great, thanks.
So that allows our operators at Post Point to monitor the system 24 hours a day, both there at the location and for our managers to do it remotely as well. In addition to this, as we install the new LED streetlights, those lights will be also monitored off of a smart system. Our surveillance cameras and our operational cameras are all tying back to central controlled servers. It starts to build that backbone network of that overall smart city for utilities operation. I think it's a pretty exciting thing to be getting into. We did build out on this a little bit more, replaced a couple of the Ethernet hubs this last year, but it is a system that works extremely well, and we are quite proud of it. One of the things that it does let us to do is very effectively staff and manage the utility system. We can do with 1 or 2 people what would require multiple crews to monitor on a daily basis with this type of a system. It also helps us to be responsive very, very quickly. So if there's an issue, we can respond to that from the touch of a button rather than having to get in a car, drive out, figure out what's going on, and then resolve the problem there. So we're quite excited about this. And then lastly, just fundamentals of our approach to how we do business. It's safety, consistency, and efficiency. We want to emphasize quality over quantity, and what's good for us is good for others, and to be efficient and work smarter and not harder. And in last closing, I just want to emphasize how pleased I am to work with the staff we have with the operations group. We have the best people working for the city of Bellingham. I was very pleased the other day to go to a retirement celebration for a custodian who'd been with us for 40 years. And that's not the only employee we have with us for 40 years. Most of our average tenure is about 13 to 14 years. People come to Bellingham and they stay. And that's for good reason. We have good people doing good work in a great community. That's all we have.
Thank you. Excellent summary of a lot of different things. I want to go back to the utilities network. You've touched on that in two ways in this presentation. One, it had to do with the surveillance cameras for safety, and that's tied into, as you say, the same fiber network we put in to control our lights, our intersections. And you also mentioned the SCADA system by which the water and sewer utility systems and all the pump stations are also monitored with a network system. Is this actually physically the same network now, or the two different networks?
The SCADA system, so everything that controls the utilities is separate. I mean, there's a much higher level of security there. And so you can't, from the internet, from the public web, get into our utility SCADA system. It's important that that remains isolated.
Okay.
And so we've got the same fiber, but different strands of fiber.
It's an independent network
That's
cut
right.
off.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's independent. Yeah.
So the non-cutoff network, I'm wondering about what sort of extra bandwidth we have. Other communities have used their public network to then start providing actual broadband services to the public as a parallel system for certain kinds of users, kind of a low-end base level option that can serve underserved communities in a lot of communities, or it can serve economic development purposes. There's extra bandwidth. It's a minimal intervention or minimal investment of the time to put in a little extra bandwidth. What kind of bandwidth do we actually have built into that system that we could actually share and it would be safe, to
Right. That is a good question. It's something that we've been looking at. We're in the process right now of inventorying our fiber and being better prepared to answer that question. The kind of the history of how our system's been developed has been when we're out doing a project, we throw fiber in. I think, long before I was here, the city was very proactive of we had the street pulled up, let's put in some conduit, throw some fiber in. We certainly had an immediate need with the utilities and the SCADA, but saw the need for future bandwidth. The issue is the inventory of that and how we map it and how we understand what's in the ground. It's been very piecemeal over the years. There's people that have it in their head, but we have to take that knowledge and actually understand it, because while there may be an opportunity, we may have some existing capacity and some existing unused bandwidth in the future that we could consider a different use for. At this point, we don't have the answer to that, and we're trying to figure it out. You're right, there's other communities that have done that. We've talked with some of those communities to try to understand what methods they use. There's some other things with our system that's a little unique, and it's not all of the system, but Terry may remember this, that the city purchased a ring of fiber from the PUD years ago.
Right.
And we purchased it at a very good price, but it had some restrictions on it. And the restrictions were that fiber could only be used for public use. It couldn't be used to compete on the private market. And that was something that was part of that original deal, because there's private internet or fiber providers in the area that didn't want the city to undercut them with subsidized fiber. It doesn't mean we couldn't get into that discussion in the future, but it's something to be aware of. It's not all of our fiber, but it's the fiber we got from the PUD.
Well, I wonder if we could consider removing that restriction. I mean, I've been monitoring nationwide. There's actually quite a movement. There were laws that were put in place to protect private cable providers from being undercut by the public, and now there's a great deal of push from the other side saying we have community needs and we'd like to meet them through public broadband. There's communities in Colorado and Tennessee and Chattanooga which are very far ahead on public broadband for economic development purposes. Mount Vernon has a small version.
And we've spoken to Mount Vernon about it. Yeah.
So, I'd like to move in that direction, but of course, we have to have an inventory, we have to know the role, we have to have a discussion first.
Yeah, I mean, and we've had some internal discussions. I know you've expressed interest. I've spoken with Tara Sundin about it and with Marty Mulholland, and you're right. We need to have that bigger community discussion about what is the need and how can the city potentially be a part of it.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see that. I've recently been having discussions with individuals asking those questions, similar questions. Who would we talk to with the city about those kind of things, and that have moved up from the Bay Area and looking at.
Okay. Well, we'll continue the discussions with Tara from an economic development perspective, and Marty with understanding what the technology needs are in the community. Clark Williams, who's our superintendent that oversees the fiber and communications, he gets regular calls from other fiber providers that would like to use a portion of our system to get through Bellingham or to somewhere else, or so it's a very active community right now, both on the, as you guys are talking about, what does the public want to see and how can we serve the public, and from the private market that wants to take advantage of what we may have.
Yeah, I just think, just for historical purposes, when we bought we went into the deal with the PUD, we were lacking in backup, redundancy in a lot of our systems. We were vulnerable in a lot of different ways, and this gave us a way to provide the redundancy in systems, so if things went out, we were covered, and we got it at a really good deal.
If I might, Mr. Mortimer,
Yes.
on this figure here, I don't want to give the impression that we've got fiber optic cable to each of these individual sites. Many, if not the majority of these sites are connected through radio networks. So the cord system that has some fiber into it is there, but it's probably not to the point where gets to every single house.
Okay.
It is,
Michael?
So, I mean, communities are working out the issues, and one of those is that usually if there is public broadband, it doesn't actually provide internet service to a customer.
to the premise,
right.
yeah.
It goes up to the building, but the utility service in a certain sense is by an ordinary provider. I'd actually kind of like to move this forward, either through the Economic Development Committee or Public Works, to at least have a staff council discussion on it. It doesn't have to happen tomorrow, sometime next year. I don't know, I would like to start that conversation, and I'm wondering if there's interest on the other council members to at some point start a discussion.
Well, I think from what I just heard when I said that Ted was saying, that was something that they would bring forward.
When do you think that might come forward? This year, next year?
Yeah, the last, I
wouldn't
don't
be
have a
this
great,
year.
it wouldn't be this year. I feel comfortable with
I can
that.
guarantee you
But,
that, Michael. They're good, but not
What can
that
you
good.
have this evening?
Yeah, you know, I really do need to sit down with Marty and Tara.
Okay.
We have, like I said, had some discussions, but there's more work to do, and I can certainly relay back to that team that there's interest at the council level to bring something forward after the first of the year.
Yeah.
If we could bring it back this next year, that'd be great.
Begin that discussion. I know there's public interest, but we don't know yet.
Right.
No. Okay. Anything, Jack?
What's the update on the streetlight replacement project?
It's a great question. So that is well underway. The crews started showing up the 1st of December. They are rapidly going through with, turn my microphone on there. They are rapidly moving forward with that project. They started first up on Sunset Boulevard, and so if you get a chance to look at the conversion, that's well underway. It should take about 6 to 8 weeks to get the lights fixtures changed, and about 6 to 8 weeks after that to get the controls all dialed in and functioning and working, all the bugs worked out.
How many are being replaced?
I believe about 3,600 lights.
Great.
And one last note, at least, I just want to thank the department for those good safety numbers. You know, it's really great to see it go down. We know with Public Works, there's a lot of opportunity for injuries, and the emphasis on safety for the employees, I just think, I really applaud you for making that a big emphasis, because it is important. And there's a lot of dangerous jobs within Public Works, a lot of opportunities for people to get hurt if they're not. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for putting this on when we had the opportunity today. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And with that, we